I know Fukushima for two things. First off, their nuclear power plant, and secondly, the Fukushima disaster. When I first heard of the Fukushima disaster, I was intrigued. It happened on a Friday way back March 11, 2011, and at exactly 2:46 p.m., one of the biggest earthquakes ever recorded made its first appearance. The epicenter was located somewhere around east of the city of Sendai, Miyagi Prefecture. And remember how I mentioned that it was also known for their power plants? Yeah, it was also affected by the earthquake, resulting in their emergency safety systems kicking in.
Okay, so emergency safety systems kicked in, right? Let's hold on to that small detail right there. And before I move on to the next part, I just like to share a crazy fun fact that I learned about this earthquake. And apparently, the earthquake was so strong that it shifted the Earth's axis and thereby increased its rotational speed by a teeny tiny bit. But that's still something. That's really insane. And that's just the first part of the entire Fukushima accident. So moving on to the next part, we now have the Tohoku tsunami. So the tsunami came just minutes after the earthquake, with waves that were up to 40 meters tall. And if our viewers are having a difficult time trying to visualize how tall that is, the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, is actually just 38 meters tall, just 2 meters shy of how tall these waves were. So when the water just started surging in onto the land, it flooded the lower part of the nuclear power plant and thereby um, destroying its reactors and along with the emergency safety systems that kicked in a while ago. So you'd expect there'd be some kind of protective layer between the Fukushima power plant and the rest of the Pacific Ocean because it was located right by the sea. And there was a 19-meter seawall dividing those two areas. So you can only imagine a 19-meter tall seawall versus waves that were up to 40 meters. It was definitely no match.
I honestly feel really empathetic with the traumas that these disasters have caused to the residents, most especially knowing the worst disaster among all, which was the nuclear accident. It has changed their lives forever. It has changed Japan and its economy. Having to deal with one melted core is so much work already, but having to deal with three alongside with a magnitude 9 earthquake, and even the 19-meter seawall was no match for it. It was even rated as level 7 on the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale. It was indeed a huge dilemma to Japan, but good thing is that they were quick thinking about it and they had the technology and resources to do so. They had this what they call cool shutdown system wherein they would freeze or cool down the entire underneath of the Fukushima area from the ground up until the waters to contain the radioactive contamination for the whole area. And the good thing is that Japan had the resources and technology to do so. And if it happened to another country, or let's say in the Philippines, it would have been a really bad disaster.
Yes, exactly. And the disaster left not only Japan, but the rest of the world scarred. It was devastating, with over 16,000 people dead and at least 2,500 cases left unresolved. Not only that, the nuclear power plant left the area around it radioactive, and the Tohoku tsunami washed almost everything there is off of Tohoku. If we're talking numbers, the property damage would cost around at least $110 billion, which is insane.
With these horrific events happening one after another, the earthquake, the tsunami, and even the meltdowns, reports confirm that there were over 160,000 evacuees of the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Disaster. The Japanese government ordered the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, to offer a compensation of $12,000 to the affected families who lost their who lost their homes. And if I'm not mistaken, another $4,000 demanded by the court as settlement for the damages. Well, years later, for the supposed Olympics 2020, Japan insisted on hosting the Games in Tokyo in aims to showcase to the public of Fukushima's recovery that killed over 1,000 people. Government officials even urged the former residents to return to their hometowns, claiming that affected areas are already undergoing an aggressive decontamination. However, due to the pandemic, the Tokyo 2020 was cancelled and postponed till the following year. Well, whether the pandemic occurred or not, families still refused to go back to the place where their lives were torn apart. Former residents resist urges of being told that their former homes are now considered safe, and then refuse being offered additional compensation, as the terror and dark memories continue to linger in their minds and hearts up till this day.
Japan is a world leader in disaster preparedness. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami caused a widespread devastation that affected many countries' agricultural and fishery areas. The earthquake had caused an overwhelming damage and humanitarian needs that required an international response. The total crops and livestock damages from the 2011 earthquake are estimated to be worth 14.2 billion yen. On the other hand, the tsunami damaged the agricultural land accounts for more than 89% of the damaged farmland. The total number of damaged agricultural management entities of 2011 earthquake and tsunami reached 37,700, or around 16% of all agricultural management entities in the affected 8 prefectures: Hokkaido, Tohoku, Kanto, Chubu, Kansai, Shikoku, Shikoku, and Kyushu.
The consecutive events have traumatized the whole of Japan, as it was a very unexpected series of disasters. A lot have lost their homes, their jobs, and the rest of all, a lot have lost their lives. It was a time in Japan where everything was just so messed up. Negligence of maintenance played a big role in the whole nuclear disaster, and the public's initial reaction would be the distrust of the government, and majority even favors phasing out, eradicating the use of nuclear power. Something that Japan, the world, should have learned is for us to improve nuclear plant systems and incorporate modern risk concepts to avoid such incidents in the future. Our current technology requires big energy and even bigger in the future. So the risk that these nuclear plants have is so great, and it means that our technology for emergency response capabilities must be that great as well.
Now, Japan's first step to recovering from the second largest nuclear accident in history was decommissioning the Fukushima power plant. The $195 billion project was led by none other than TEPCO, and it started in April 2014, but will not be finished until the next 33 years. So that's how long it takes to clean up scattered radioactive material. And the process of decommissioning the power plant involves water decontamination in the Pacific Ocean, as it had greatly affected the scattered radioactive material in the Pacific Ocean had greatly affected agriculture and living conditions in the town of Fukushima.
Given that this accident has affected the economy of Japan, it has also affected their agriculture due to the radioactive contamination in the ground, the soil perhaps, the waters, their poultry, and almost everything for an event which underestimated the word disaster. And since a lot of people lost faith in the use of nuclear power, a lot have considered to use renewable energy instead. Nuclear plants have to be upgraded as time passes by, thus its cost increases and increases while the cost for renewables decreases. In the next 10 years, renewables will add well over 100 reactors worth of electricity, and given that nuclear power takes a lot longer to build compared to renewables, people believe that it is the best option compared to nuclear energy.
Now, Our listeners might be wondering how the Fukushima accident has anything to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. But you see, just like the Fukushima accident that went from one tragedy to another, the earthquake, the tsunami, and then the nuclear fallout, the COVID-19 pandemic has done just the same. Because over the course of a year, Filipino people have gradually went through one crisis from another, and we're gonna go over some of the many. So, what better way to start this conversation than to talk about the national economic collapse? With the pandemic came a 9.5% decrease in our gross domestic product, which is the biggest recorded decrease so far. We also have now experienced the worst recession since the Marcos debt crisis in 1984. And evidence of this is the 10.3% average unemployment rate in 2020, leaving approximately 4.5 million Filipinos jobless.
Another challenge that still revolves until now is the struggle to distance learning. Last May 5, 2020, the Department of Education Secretary Leonor Briones had announced the implementation of online classes for school year 2020 to 2021. Due to the pandemic, a lot of people have lost their jobs, a lot of people are currently having financial problems. For low-income households, and because of the abrupt transition of online classes this year, this can be quite a distress as not everyone could have such equipment efficient for online learning. Not even every family has a wireless connection in their respective homes. And speaking of internet connection, there, as you may expect, is the problem of an unstable or no internet connection at all. Most, if not all, have struggled with poor internet connections by now. One would surely feel the pressure whenever our connection acts up or when answering a timed or submitting an assignment. Anxiety surely fills in our minds whenever those occur unexpectedly throughout our days.
In response to COVID-19, there is a growing interest in utilizing volunteers to provide health promotion and education services as a way to help fill the gap between the population's need and resources available. There is already an established tradition of community health workers, most of whom are uncompensated. One of the reasons that they are uncompensated is the fact that the government focuses on spending the funded money to sustain the needs and help more people before the COVID-19 cases inflates. Community health workers delivering health information and advice to their neighbors could prove to be one of the keys to maintaining the physical as well as financial health of the nation.
And see, those are just some of the many crises that the Filipino people had to go through and are continuing to go through up to this day because of the pandemic. So let's now take a look at what the government can do to mitigate or to eradicate these problems. So seeing that the root of all of them is the pandemic, it's only natural that we demand expanded medical resources. And that includes, first of all, accurate and on-time hazard pay for health workers. Another thing is the proper distribution of vaccines. And, overall, expanded medical resources can be achieved by responsible budget management, because the Filipino people don't need white sand beaches. We don't need entertainment. What we need is accessible healthcare and education in these trying times. So that's just another thing that the government has to improve. But before I go rambling on about what the government should or shouldn't do, you might be wondering what you can do. One thing is, you can become a bit more compassionate, a bit more understanding, and a bit more kind. And so just like that, it's time that we bring it upon ourselves too, to become more compassionate, because that way we all have an equal chance at surviving this pandemic.